Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial. I'm Chidumen Namdi. Here we are going to learn about the new Angular signal input. Now here we have a child component and a parent component, and also as you can see in this child component, it has a color class field with a value set to the string red, and it is decorated with this at input decorator. Now this input decorator is the traditional way in Angular in which to mark a class field as an input property. Then this input property is what the child component will use to get data from the parent component. In other words, the parent component will send data to the child component via this class field. So whatever class field that is marked with the at input decorator becomes the input property of that child component. So parent component can pass data to it via the name of the class field. So as we can see in the parent component template, it is rendering the child component and then passing the value of this color class field to the child component via the color input property of the child component. So that's why we have purple inside the child component here. So we see the traditional way of receiving values from parent component inside the child component. Now, with the arrival of the Angular signal input, we can do away with this at input decorator and use the Angular signal input to make this color class field also an input variable, and also in the same way making it a signal value. Now let's do that. So let's convert this class field to use the Angular signal input instead of the at input decorator. First, we will remove this at input decorator. Now this no longer an input property. So to make it an input property using the Angular signal input, we need to call the input function and assign it to this class field. Now to do that, first we need to import the input function from the Angular slash core module. Then come here, we will now call the function input and then pass in the initial value of the color class field, which is red. Now, doing this, we have now made this color class field to be an input property and also becoming a signal value too. So you can see color input signal, which is of type string. Now, this is now a signal. In order to read the value, we need to call it as a function because it is now a getter function. You can refer back to our signal videos that we did previously in order to learn what signals are. So this will not work like this if we save this, because this is a getter function and this is a getter function. So we need to retrieve the value inside this color, which is a signal. So we need to call it as a function like this. So it now returns red. And if we call it here the same way, here becomes red. So this is a getter function, and whenever we call it, it returns the value passed to it or the current value of the signal. Now let's save, and now let's refresh to make sure our app is still working. So you see it's working without any errors. So you see how we were able to convert from the traditional at input decorator to the new Angular signal input without any major change. We did not even touch the parent component. The parent component is as it is before. We did not touch it. Only what we did was to first remove the at input decorator, then call the input function, passing in as a parameter the initial value of the color class field, and then assigning the value of this input call to the color class field. Now this makes this color class field of the child component an input property and also a signal value. Then we just came to this template and then changed the property to function calls because signals are getter function. So to retrieve the value, we'll call them as function. So that's what we did here to retrieve the value inside of this color class field and also inside of this color. So if we click on this change color, you will see it works as usual. So this is how signal input works. Okay, here we will look into optional inputs and required inputs. By default, Angular signal inputs are optional. So if we remove these from the parent component, it will still render, because by default, like I said, Angular signal inputs are optional. So whether you pass them to the component or not, it will still render, and it will take the initial value of what we pass to it here. We can still remove the initial value or pass no value here, then the value of the signal will become undefined. Now let's save and let's make this black to see what it renders. So it's undefined. So that's one of the powerful use cases of Angular signal inputs. Now let's come to required inputs. Required inputs makes it a must that the parent component must pass the input to the child component. Now to do that, let's see it. Now to do that, what we have to do is come here, add the dot, and then add required here. So now this required makes this input, makes this signal to become required. So that means it must be passed from the parent component. We still have an error here. Yes, because we made it required. There is no need passing an initial value to it. So now the initial value must come from the parent component. So when we save this, we'll get an error. So you see it said the required input color from component child component must be specified. It must be specified here. So we'll just have to add it here, add the color here, it goes away, and we see our error goes away and it renders our child component. So you see, whenever we mark our input like this as required by calling the required function in the input in the input object, it makes this color class field or the color input property that it must be sent in by the parent component. If it is removed from the parent component, we will have an error. So to fix it, we must pass in the color. Then also remember, the value here must not be a class field from this parent component. We can pass in street data inside it, like we can pass red inside it like this, or yellow. We can pass it like this. So we can pass data straight without using the color class, without using the class field from the parent component. Very good. Now let's look at aliasing an input. See, we have marked this color as being an input property by doing this, right? Now, very good. Now, Angular uses the name of this class member name as the name of the input to this child component. So because the name of this class field is color, then the input name, the child component will receive the input must be color. So if we change it to data color, then we must come here and change it also to data color, and then update the template in the child component. So you see the name of the class member variable becomes the name of the input to the child component. Now, this Angular signal input has a way in which we can change the public name of an input class field. Now, this is by using the alias property. Now, to do that, we'll come here. Let's pass in the initial value and then pass in an input function. So inside this property, we'll declare an alias property, and then the value will become the public name of this input. So now let's make the public name, or rather let's change this to color, and then make the public name to be data color. Then in as much as the public name is data color, this child component is still seeing this property as color, not data color. So we'll change everything here in the template as color. So This is what happened here. We don't want the parent component to send data to this child component using the name of this class field color, but we want to use another public name for it, which is an alias. So to do that, we will pass in an input options to the Angular signal input function, then pass in setting a property name which is alias, and then the value becomes the public name of this input property. So now the parent component will pass in data to this child component via the name data color, no longer color. So if we come here and change this data color to color, it will not work. So you see we have an error, can't bind to color since it isn't a known property of child component. So we have color here as a property of this child component, but this alias that we set up here, which is this data color, becomes a known property outside of this child component. So the parent component no longer sees color, but it will see data color because of what we did here. Now the alias now becomes the public name. So to make this work, we need to change it back to data color, and it works. So the alias is just like the nickname or the public name. Now we can also do the same. We are using required. So you see it works also. You see how we're able to use alias with optional input and also with required input. Now here, let's look at how we can derive values from our signal input. Remember we said this input returns a signal. So this color becomes a signal. So since it is a signal, we can derive values from it. So derivation of values from a signal is just like creating another signal that is dependent on this parent signal. Now let's do that. So let's derive a value. Let's derive a value from this color signal that will just display on our DOM the length of the color or the length of the value inside this signal. So first, let me remove this and revert it to our old self. Then let me come here and set it to color. Save, save. Okay. So very good. To derive values, we use the computed function. So first we say length of color. Now this length of color becomes our derived signal from this color signal. So this length of color signal will be dependent on this color signal. Then we call the computed. So now this computed is used to create a read-only signal or create a computed signal, which is a read-only signal. So inside it, we will pass in a function. We'll pass in a function. So now let's return just the name, this dot color, the length of our color signal. Very good, the length of it. Then we'll come here and just display it here. So since this length of color is a signal, then we need to call it as a function to get the value. Very good. You see the length of the color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when we change it, the 3 characters, 4 characters, 3. So when we change it, it just shows us 5. So you see what we did here? We derived another signal from this signal input because this input returns a signal. As you can see, it's input signal. So it extends the original signal class in Angular. Now we use this computed function to derive another signal from this color. So you see we passed in a derivation function inside this computed function and then returned the length of this color signal. So we see that we called the color signal to get the value inside it, and then because since we know that the value inside it is a string, then we called the length to give us the number of characters inside the string. So by doing this length of color becomes a dependent on this color signal, so that whenever the value of this color signal changes, then this computed function will call this derivation function again to recompute the value of this signal length of color. So that's the reason why whenever we click the change of color, this color changes, the value of this changes, then also the length of the color changes, because this computed function will call this because it is dependent on this color by what we did here, and then grab the latest value inside this color signal and then get the length. And that's why we have the current and the real-time updated value of the length of characters inside the value of this color signal. So this is how we can derive values from a signal. So we're able to do this, like I said before, because this input returns a signal. And as you can remember from our previous video on signals, we can derive values from a signal. We can also derive multiple values here, so far as the signals are called in between this derivation function. Then this length of color will be dependent on them, so that whenever they change, the value of this length of color will change, or the value of this length of color will be recomputed. So the computed function will call this again so as to recompute the value of this length of color signal. Now let's look at how we can monitor changes to this signal. Now let's do that. First, let me remove this and then remove this. So we are going to monitor changes on this signal. Remember, like I said previously, the angular signal input returns a signal, and with a signal we can monitor its changes. So you can refer back to my previous video on the basics of signals. So now, to monitor changes on a signal, we need to use the effect function. So now to do that, now remember, effect function can only be called on injection context. So I explained everything in that my previous video, so you can refer back to it if you do not understand what signals are in Angular. So to call the effect function, we will need to establish an injection context, which is a constructor or inside the function. So but I want to do it here. So first, so inside here I will now call the effect function. You see the effect function is also exported from the angular slash core module. I'll call it like this. Then you see we are now passing the effect function inside here, inside this. So now this callback will be called whenever the signal that this effect monitors changes. So inside here, let's just console log the value of the color signal. Let me say console.log. Then inside it, you say this dot color, call it like this. So now let's save. So with this, the effect function monitors this color signal. So whenever its value changes, then this effect function or this effect of callback will be called, so that this console.log will be executed to display the current value inside this signal. So let's open our console.log. Let me make it to be here. Then go to console, clear everything. Now let me make it bigger so that we can see it. Now whenever we click on this change color, the parent component will pass another color to this child component. So Angular will set the value of this signal to be the value of whatever the parent passed to this child component via this color input property. So when it does that, the value of this signal color changes, and then this effect will be notified, and it will call its callback to display the current value of the color signal in our browser here. So now let's start. We'll click on this change color and we'll see the current color of this color signal logged here. So let's do that. Now let's click here. So you see red, we have red here. So you see that's why we have red here. Now let me click it again. we have yellow, it changed to yellow. The parent component passed in the yellow color, so the input in the child component then changed to yellow. So the effect callback will be run because the effect is dependent on this color signal. So that's why we have yellow logged on our console. Then we click on it again, we have green. You see we have green here. So on and so forth. So now the effect function was able to monitor this color signal because this color signal was called inside the callback of the effect function. If we had did this, if we had did this, we will not see we will not see the current value of the color signal on our developer console because this color was called outside of this effect callback. So when we change it, we will not see anything here because this color is called outside of this effect API callback. So it is no longer a dependent on this effect. So this effect does not monitor it. So but if we call it inside it like this, then the effect can monitor it because the signal is called inside the callback of the effect API. So you see, we can also do something like this color value. And also do something like this color value. It will still work because this color value is called inside the callback of this effect API. So when we clear our console and change the color, we still see it. So now let's see what happens if we'll move this to another functional method. Let me say get color and say return this dot color, and then remove this, call it here, then we'll save. So now when we change the color, yeah, you see we have it because this get color is called inside this API. And using JavaScript inlining code, this get.color will be replaced with this return this dot color. So now this dot color will now be called inside the environment of this effect API callback. So that's why the effect API is able to monitor this color signal even though we extracted it to another method, which is this get color. Okay, so let's learn about value transforms in Angular signal input. Value transforms are used to convert the raw value coming in from a parent component to the expected input type in our child component. Now, let's say, for example, this parent component passed in purple to our child component. Now, with our value transform, we can get hold of the raw value purple, which is coming in from the parent component, and transform it to another color or to another expected type that we want. Now, to do that, we need to set our transform in our Angular signal input. So to do that, we need to pass the input options object here, then set our transform property and the value. Now, the value of the transform property is a function, as you can see, and it takes in a value as a property. Now, this value is the raw value coming in from the parent component, and we type it as a string here because we know the data coming in is a string. So you see this purple here is a string and everything here are strings. So we know that the value is of type string. So that's why we set the type here as string. Now, whatever we return from this function will be the value of this color signal. So let me say if we return magenta, now magenta will be the value of this color signal. Even though the parent component sent purple, red, blue, green, or yellow, now the final value of this color signal will be magenta. Now let's save. So you see. Now let's print what was sent so you can see what's happening. Now let's open up, then go to our console. So you see purple was sent, but the final value that we got in our color signal is magenta because this color transform function returns magenta. So we can, instead of returning color itself, we can even just return the length of the color being passed in. So we can just say something like this: value dot length. Then there will be an error here because value dot length is now an int, but this transform should return a string because that's the value it is receiving here. So we will now say value dot length. We can now convert it to string, and you see it goes away. So now when we save, it goes away. Now let me add a black color so that we can be seeing what we have there. So you see 6, we have 6 there as the length of the color being passed in. So you see how value transform works. It transforms the original raw data coming from the parent component to the expected input type that we want. So what arrived to this color, or what the parent sent, was purple, string purple, but we converted it to be the length of characters inside a string, which is 6, now to be assigned finally as the value of this color signal. This is how the transform works. Now, one of the best ways in which we can use this transform is when we want to do some mathematical evaluations, or we don't want a separate variable or a separate input property for that. Now let's take, for example, we have age here coming in, and we need to get the multiple, or this age multiplied by 2 in our DOM. So we want to use it like that. So instead of setting up another age multiplied input property, we can simply use this transform. This is a number. Can you simply use this transform and just say, and say value times 2, then get the multiple 2 of it and then return it. You see, so that's where this transform functionality comes in handy. Okay, now let's try it. Let me just change this to 10, and then let me say ages. Very good. So this one ages, let me just change it so you can understand everything. Now change this to age. What else will come here? Change to age, and then to age. So come here, change to age. Let me remove this, we're no longer using it. So you see, so we have age 20 years, 10 years here as what's coming in. So we want to get the multiple of it, or the double of it. So instead of having something like age multiplied here, instead of having age multiplied or just declaring another input property, we can simply use the input transform, get the age coming in, then simply multiply it by 2. We get our age multiplied here in our DOM. So this is the end of this video. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this video. If you have any questions or any comments regarding what we did on this Angular signal inputs, you can drop your comments in the comment section. I'll go through them and I'll answer each and every one of them. Thank you so much. Like, share this video, and also subscribe to my channel for more content like this. In my next video, we will be looking at Angular output signal. So you can subscribe and also on your notification to get notified first whenever that video drops. Then also, if you need or have any confusion on any feature of Angular you want me to explain, please pen that down on the comments and I'll go through them and I'll definitely do a video on each of them. Thank you so much and see you on the next video. Bye.